Hey Rob, thank you for coming along for another podcast today. You well?
I don't like the fact that your camera makes you look young and handsome and swarthy, and I look like a
I,
fat
Rob, I
old
don't know if it's fair to point
bouncer
the
who's got a
finger of
pink
blame at
face.
the. Yeah, no, you're pointing the finger of blame at the camera and the lighting
Are you saying
equipment,
it's
and not
real?
the clear factor of age here, Rob.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah,
Sorry, mate. Carry on. We'll crack on. We'll do it anyway.
cool. No, good fun. Wanting to talk about today, really important topic around coping skills, emotional coping skills, your ability and your belief that you can and will persevere through some challenging times. So obviously looking at emetophobes in particular, it's an important discussion to have about why building up a belief in your coping skills is so important when it comes to getting over your phobia for good. So do you mind elaborating on that a little bit?
Yeah. So, again, first of all, a little bit of background then. So, when people feel powerful, they very rarely suffer from anxiety or stress or depression or have any other kind of mental health symptoms, right? So when I talk about powerful, again, I'm talking about someone who scores in the 80s or 90s on our TQ, or whose mental health they're managing really well. Okay, if they're managing it well, okay,
Yeah.
and they've got high self-efficacy and their self-esteem is good and strong and so on, then they feel powerful. Okay, they feel powerful. And what that means is, what does powerful mean? It means that they believe they've got good control skills and good coping skills. Either one or the other or both. Ideally both, but one or the other is preferable. Okay? If you can do one or the other, if I know that I'm supposed to be going to this party with you tonight and I got lots of social anxiety, okay, and I'm already worrying about it, I'm already thinking about it, if I know that I can do things to make it easier to cope, I'll calm down and I won't worry. If I know
Yep.
there's
Yep.
things I can do to completely avoid it, I'll calm down and won't worry. I'm only going to worry, I'm only going to feel anxious or stressed, and the same thing goes for any situation in life, okay? Whether it's a public speaking thing, whether it's a phobia, whether it's a metaphobia, flying, darkness, cancer, meeting new people, going to school, being on your own, going through something stressful, you know, literally any situation at all in life, if you've built up a sense of power, and that power is either about your ability to cope or your ability to control, you're going to feel powerful. All right. So
Yep.
what do metaphobes do then? Generally speaking, they've got good coping skills and control skills in almost all areas of their life, but not in the area of metaphobia. In the area of metaphobia, they have really weak coping skills. And so because they always think, I can't cope, I won't be able to cope, I'd rather die than do that, they have to employ their avoidance skills instead. So a phobia is in
Yep.
itself an avoidance skill, and avoidance is about control. Yeah, one of the ways which I can control my phobia of spiders, right, is to never go in an old house, never go walk across a farmer's field, never look in a dark broom cupboard, right. And if I avoid broom cupboards and this, that, and the other, okay, and I always make sure I live in a city and I got windows shut tight every night, pretty good chance I'm going to avoid spiders. So I calm down. I'm calming down,
Mm.
I'm managing my stress because I'm avoiding. The trouble with that is when I see a spider, I'm going to panic because I've got no coping skills around spiders. Okay?
Yep.
So with the metaphobes then, when they first develop, when they first create a metaphobia, the different level between their coping skills and their control skills isn't so bad. But once they've had it for a few years, their control skills are going to be really high. Their skills, their abilities to avoid are going to be really high, and their coping skills are going to be really low. And if you think about it, when you had a metaphobia, that's what you did all day. You spent all day thinking about what else can I do to avoid? What else can
Yep.
I do to avoid? I can check sell-by dates. I can wash my hands 20 times. I can not eat this. I can not go to school when there's a bug going around. I can avoid that person. I can avoid going out at all. I can do all of these things to try and avoid, because I don't believe I could cope. Oh, the thought of it makes me feel terrible. There's no way I can tolerate that. I cannot cope with that at all. I've got to avoid. And we've talked about it before. If you imagine quite simply a scale of 1 to 10, or you imagine the stressometer. If you imagine the stressometer from a scale of 1 to 10, let's take a new situation for you. Cold swimming. Okay, cold swimming.
Sure. Yep.
So if you're going to start doing cold swimming right now, today, you've probably got a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is, this is great. 2 is, this is easy. 3 is a little bit uncomfortable. 4 is quite uncomfortable, really uncomfortable. 8, 9, 10, worst thing in the world, got to avoid it. Okay? It's only when you get to 10 that you have to avoid. You're 9. If you said to me, cold swimming, if I had to jump in the sea right now, my underpants, right? That's a 9 out of 10. Well, a 9 out of 10 is, that's really effing horrible.
Yes.
But I would cope. Yeah, I wouldn't like it, right?
Yep.
It'd be freezing, and I'd be shivering, and every bone in my body would be screaming, get out, get out, get out. But there's a part of me that says, you're not going to die, Joe. You'll cope. And so I can do it.
Still do it, yeah.
If that needle went to 10, I can't do that. I would not be able to cope. And if you remember Mary, who I spoke to this week, Mary, who I think is about 120 now. Actually, she's not. She's 80-something, 6, I think, 87. Mary, all her life for 75 years, told herself every day, I could not cope if I was sick. So she had to avoid. When literally the day she started saying to herself, it would be horrible, but I would cope, she was over it.
Yes.
She didn't have to reduce it from 10 down to 0 on the stressometer. All she had to do is reduce it from 10 down to 9. She had to reduce it from, that would be the worst thing in the world, I'd rather die, to, it's still really horrible, but I would get through it. You don't need to avoid that, because you believe you would cope, even though it'd be horrible. Okay, so that's about coping. Okay, and if you if you've had emetophobia for more than a year, you've almost certainly given up on all the coping skills you would have had previously, and you've just opted then for continuing to create control skills or avoidance skills. And it's a clever thing to do, right? If your problem isn't emetophobia, but your problem is being burgled, and there's a group of people going around doing violent burglary in your area every night, it's quite sensible to avoid, right? It's quite sensible not just to leave your doors unlocked and think, do you know what, I would cope if I got burgled. The clever thing to do is put extra locks on, maybe some CCTV, get a Rottweiler or something, or shotgun license or whatever. I'm being silly, but you understand the metaphor, right? So sometimes it's good to create avoidance skills, but every moment you're creating an avoidance skill, you are by definition giving up your control skills, and more importantly, you're giving up the belief that you could cope. You're giving up your coping skills in order to make avoidance skills. So every day you're telling yourself, I couldn't cope. When you're locking your doors for the 3rd time and checking them because of these scary burglars, you're telling yourself, I don't want to get burgled, it'll be awful, it'll be horrible. So every time you're hand washing, when you're in the metro, every time you're checking the dates, every time you're talking to someone, every time you're avoiding something, okay, you are creating anxious, worrying thoughts about sickness and about the fact you couldn't cope. Well, of course, that then leads into creating even stronger beliefs, and it's a downward spiral from them. So a coping skill, all the research says, the most important thing about coping skills is your belief that you've got them. Believing that you'd cope is more important than actually having specific skills where you could cope. Just believing that you'll be all right is way more important.
So, sorry, Rob, just to clarify that point, that would be the difference between having someone that's a professional fighter feeling like they would cope with walking home late at night because they know they have the skill set to fight off someone attacking them, and having the belief that if you were attacked that you would get through it, that it would be unpleasant, and but I would get through it, I would cope, I'd tolerate it, so even though you don't actually have the physical fighting abilities.
Absolutely. But, and I've used that metaphor, but that analogy before, as you know, and the lady that I took through years ago who lived near Wimbledon Common, she said just that. For example, she said, I'll give you a real threat, Rob, a real thing. It's terrifying to walk through Wimbledon Common at night. It's a scary, dangerous place, and I feel really anxious doing it, and that's a fact. I said, okay, she was a policewoman. I said, okay, let's say you do your firearms training, and you've now got a gun in your bag, or your backpack, or your pocket. Now how are you going to feel? She thought about it. She said, well, I wouldn't worry anymore. So that's an avoidance, that's a control skill, okay? I said, okay, well, let's say you're not going to do that. What else could you do? You know, let's say you went to martial arts and you studied jiu-jitsu or karate or something, and you felt more powerful that way. You're feeling anxious because of the thoughts you're having about it, not the event. Not the event. It's never about the actual event. Remember, a phobia is I'm creating stress and anxiety about the thoughts I'm having and the emotions I'm generating. Phobia about being sick isn't about being sick. That was last week's podcast, right? It's never about being sick in the first place. Okay? It's about the emotion that you generate about a situation. So the moment you can feel yourself feel more powerful, you stop creating the emotion. Yeah? As you know, I fly a little microlight, a little tiny little aeroplane. Okay? So if you and I were in the aeroplane and the engine cut out, which they used to do frequently in the older types, right? You, I'm hoping and guessing, would feel really, really anxious and nervous, okay? I would still be quite calm and relaxed because I've got a skill set in knowing what's going to happen, okay? And knowing what I can do, and I would calmly land it somewhere else. You would probably be terrified. I would be quite calm, okay? Part of your training is always, every time you go flying, you practice a forced landing in case the engine goes out, right? But if you and I went up in a helicopter today and it just went and it stopped, we would both, well, you know the phrase I'm thinking about, we'd both create as much anxiety as each other, right? Because I have no skills about coping with a helicopter landing. I can't fly one. I know less about it than you do. Okay? So I would feel just as anxious, and I have no skill set in coping with a helicopter that's gone wrong. So I would feel very, very I would generate lots of anxiety and fear and discomfort like the next person would. How would I get over that? How do you want to get over it? Learn to fly a helicopter. Right? Or partially learn to fly a helicopter. Okay? I don't know whether it was you. Did we talk earlier this week, or did I imagine it, about SAS training and Royal Marine training?
We spoke about it on a call together, not on a podcast. So yeah,
There's a call together, you and I had,
elaborate.
and you got a friend in the Marines.
Yes, it was. Yeah.
And we okay, so that's exactly what they're doing.
Yeah.
That's exactly what any military or special forces training is doing all over the world. Okay, there's loads of films about Navy SEALs and that kind of stuff. What they're doing is training themselves so hard to the point where they could cope with anything. Okay, I basically have a fit. If I stub my toe, I think it's the most painful thing in the world, right? But these people are trained to be shot 3 times and keep going. That's what they're trained for. That's what they're training. That's the whole purpose of their training, is to learn to tolerate intense discomfort and pain and pressure and all those things that would normally make a normal person feel really anxious, you know, cut to bits and blood pouring out all over the place, right? You and I would have a heart attack. These guys, these people are trained to tolerate that and keep going. It's exactly what we're talking. It's exactly the same process. Exactly the same process. They're being trained to have coping skills beyond the endurance of most normal people. But
okay, so Rob,
sorry.
if we're sorry, mate, go on. Finish your point, and then I'll cut across you.
Sorry, mate. And this is an interesting point because you and I touched on it. In fact, if you read books about people that have been through this training, you'll know that actually the suicide rate of people in kind of some of these special forces, and particularly it was in the British SAS. You know, you had all those books after Gulf War I from Andy McNabb about Bravo 20 and all this kind of stuff, right? A significant chunk of the people that were in his troop, that the toughest people in the whole wide world, have later committed suicide. Okay? So even the best military training in the world, training you to withstand massive physical hardship and being shot 3 times, okay, doesn't necessarily train you to defeat depression or anxiety in other situations.
There's a big difference.
You know, they're training them really, really hard in one area. Yeah, they're still as prone to depression and anxiety as the next person is. Okay, that training, that military training, you know, the TV shows, the SAS training and Who Dares Wins and this kind of stuff, they're training people to physically tolerate great things. They're not training them to emotionally tolerate things. Sorry, you carry on.
Yeah, no, so what I was just going to add to that point then is, if for anyone that has a metaphobia, the idea of, you know, and a metaphobia sufferer, for the most part, could probably hop into an ice cold water bath or something, right?
Yeah.
That might be a 9 out of 10, but they have a belief that they could do it. It's not the same as the idea of, you know, going and helping their mate be sick, right?
Yeah.
So, and in relation to anything smaller than that, just general safety seeking behaviors, right? As small as allowing themselves to drop chewing gum for the day or cook chicken this evening, right?
Yeah.
That, the idea of cooking chicken to a lot of emetophobes is a 10 out of 10,
Yes.
far worse than the idea of jumping in the cold sea. So when we're looking at safety seeking behaviors in particular, how can emetophobes start to build up their ability to cope with uncomfortable emotions if they don't believe that they can challenge a safety seeking behavior?
Okay, good question. So first of all, I don't know whether we talked about this on a podcast or we talked about it in training, but when someone goes through the Thrive program or Emetophobia-Free for emetophobia, they don't actually need to challenge their safety-seeking behaviours. Okay, and this is one of the kind of sales points about it, right? We're not going to ask them. We're not going to say you've got to stop washing your hands, or you've got to start eating chicken, or you're going to have to expose yourself to someone being sick in order to get better. We specifically don't say that, and they don't need to do that. And the reason they don't need to do that is because as they gradually improve their mental health and they're thriving, okay, and they're feeling more powerful, they'll just stop doing it anyway. Okay, because they won't feel as anxious in that situation again. Don't forget, they're not anxious about what they think they're anxious about. They're anxious about their thoughts and not about the situation. So what happens then, as the average person goes through the program and they're building coping skills and they're feeling more powerful because they're challenging underlying beliefs and this kind of stuff, they feel more powerful and their safety-seeking behaviours just kind of disappear into the background. Only if someone has gone all the way through the program and their scores are really high and they're thriving in every other way and those safety-seeking behaviours are still there, only at that point would they need to look at them. But they'd only really still be there just out of habit, not because they had any great meaning to them, because they wouldn't be feeling anxious about that again. And the reason for that is, as you are building up your sense of power and control, your space or your sense of power, by looking at and challenging all of those underlying beliefs, those 50 questions in our TQ quiz, right, those space questions, as you're feeling more powerful in all those other areas, your general sense of power and control is increasing quite dramatically. And so you're going to feel much, much better in so many different situations. And that's why then that your worries and fears about emetophobia just start to decrease, because it was never about being sick in the first place. It was always about your coping skills and how powerful you feel. And I've said before, and I think I've said on the podcast, that if someone going through the Thrive program or Metaphobia-Free only did the first 3 chapters in the manual, but did it really, really well, they could chuck the rest of the manual away. Because if they worked on their space, their sense of power and control, that would change everything else anyway. Because your thinking styles, okay, if I feel confident and happy to go to this party with you tonight, I'm not going to be brooding about it. I'm not going to be hypervigilant. I'm not going to be worried about it. I'm not going to be losing sleep about it. I'm not going to be thinking in a black and white catastrophic way about it, because I feel powerful. So those thoughts wouldn't come today. However, tell me you're going to take me for a flight in a helicopter that broke down last time it flew, okay, and I'm going to worry about it. All right? So as you're feeling more powerful, those things disappear into the background because they were never about what you thought they're about in the first place. All right? In terms of coping skills specifically, then, it's probably the most important thing for emetophobes to do. And they will do it
Yes, agree.
indirectly by working on their sense of power and control, because 50% of their sense of power and control is their understanding that they would cope. Yeah? But what they can do and what they should do, and in the newer versions of the manual that I'm writing at the moment, they want to work a lot more on their coping skills and ask themselves, particularly the emotional coping skills. You said that at the very beginning there. The emotional coping skills is, how can I learn to cope better and to manage my emotions better? How can I stop my emotions immediately going from 0 to 100 on the Richter scale so quickly? How can I stop it at 50 and therefore feel more in control, feel better? Well, anything you can do to gently challenge your emotions and your feelings in situations that you wouldn't normally do is going to have a massive beneficial impact. And funny you mentioned cold water swimming a minute ago. Most emetophobes could do that. They'd need to practice and try, but the first time they did it, they would feel very anxious, as anyone would, because it's a new situation. Any new situation can create anxiety and stress because it's new. You don't know how you're going to respond. Being in a bull ring, chuck a red cape on and jump in a bull ring, you don't know how you're going to respond until you do that, right? So you've got to get in that situation and try it out. And if you imagine that, so something, any emetophobe listening, if they don't already do it, go and start to do cold water swimming. And the first time you do it, you dip your toe in the water and you think, crikey, that's freezing. And every bone in your body is screaming, get out, go home, have a nice cup of tea, turn the fire on. You don't need to do that. But instead of turning away, you persevere. You tell yourself, you're creating this internal narrative, this Kuh's law, your inner voice is saying, I'm not going to run away. Actually, do you know, I'm not going to run away, Joe, because I can do this. I can tolerate this. I know it feels really uncomfortable, but I can tolerate it. And so you bite your lip and you stay in the water, and then you're going up to your ankles. And again, your brain goes, get out, this is horrible. And your heart's beating fast, and you probably think you're going to have a heart attack, and you're feeling really anxious and blah, blah, blah. And you're feeling quite emotional or stressed. But again, you take a minute or two, you calm yourself down. You said, no, I can do this. I will be able to cope. It's not going to kill me. I can do this. It just feels really uncomfortable, but I'll be all right. And then your knees and then your waist and blah, blah, blah. Okay? You stay in the situation. Yep. Exactly the same as we've said before about how you'd overcome a phobia, like a phobia of spiders. You'd go in the cupboard a little bit and tolerate, and then you go in a bit further, and the next day you go in and you pick up a dead spider, and the next day you go and pick in. It's like exposure. That's why exposure works for just about everything else, because what is exposure in essence? You are learning to tolerate uncomfortable feelings that you were creating being in that situation. The spider wasn't creating those feelings. Okay? The way I was thinking about the spider was creating those feelings. It wasn't the spider. So if I start to change the way I think about the spider by gently exposing myself to that situation and then calming myself down, I'm going to overcome my fear of spiders. It was never about the spider. So cold water swimming would be a really good way for emetophobes or anyone else to learn in another situation how to manage, control, cope with strong emotions.
Yeah. I was working through that, funnily enough, with a client the other day, who then also went on to say that they had a bit of a general fear about water, right? So, not only did I just suggest we'll go and do it under the shower, but it would also be of benefit if you remember the difference between a fear and a phobia. The phobia, you're looking at that 10 out of 10 anxiety, that absolute, I couldn't cope with it. Yeah. The fear, I had a bit of a general fear of spiders whilst I was going through the program for my Metaphobia, right? I didn't run out of the house screaming and crying when I saw a spider, but I also didn't want to pick one up, or I didn't want to deal with it. But I didn't have a phobia of spiders.
Yes, it wasn't a 10.
Just about. Yeah, it wasn't a 10. No, it was more like an 8, right?
Okay.
So it was another really helpful thing for me to begin to challenge was to start to use all of these new skills I was learning in relation to my 8 being my fear of spiders, right? Yeah. And it's the same chat that I was having with a client about, well, you haven't got this 10 out of 10 fear when it comes to water. You don't like water, right? But it would be another really good opportunity to start to build up these emotional coping skills. You start doing all of these things. You start dipping your toe in the water and gradually working your way in there and reminding yourself that it's not about the water, it's the way you're thinking about the water, and continually trying your best to stay on top of it. And you get past that point and you prove to yourself that you can cope when you're in water. That's a massive block of evidence to suggest that you can cope with some really uncomfortable emotions. And then that's going to allow you to feel a lot more powerful about
And
overcoming
positive.
your phobia.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
positive. And the
Yeah.
other thing to remember is that when you do something like that, you're doing two things. One is that there's a specific result, specific goal, and there's also a general one or a global one. Okay, so what you are doing is you're overcoming your angst, which means you're overcoming your and calming down your emotions and your fears and anxieties around being in cold water. So that's specific. The general one or the global one is you're also teaching yourself that you can learn to manage your emotions and learn to cope with other things. And of course, then you think, well, if I can do it about water, it's going to be easier for them to go on and do it about flying and spiders because you've already done it once. You are feeling more powerful. You are starting to think, you know, I can do anything. If I did it about water and I hated water, I could do this about anything else at all. So there's always a massive knock-on benefit. You know, we know that, you know, people go out and they achieve one thing in life, say running a marathon, and the knock-on effect of that on their general self-esteem and their general social confidence is massive, because we know how powerful you feel affects every area of your life, not just the one area that you're working on. So people listening, if they go away and they list 10 situations in life, not to do with the metaphobia, right? 10 situations in life that they don't like or would avoid if they could. We've given them one, cold water swimming. We've given them another one, spiders. Find another 8 situations in life that they would normally avoid, or that if they've never done it before, they just know or believe would create a lot of anxiety, and go out and do them. Go out and do them. And if it's helpful, think about the major contributing factors to metaphobia: perfectionism, low self-esteem, high social anxiety or social confidence or obedience to authority. So those 3 for starters. What can I do to challenge my perfectionism? I know for a fact there's a video somewhere, I'll dig it out, a lady that we affectionately call Blindy, because she was blind, went through the program and became a Thrive program coach a number of years ago. And the main things she talked about in building coping skills was the coach that she went through said, right, this week, what you got to do is, because she was a real big perfectionist, had lots of social anxiety. This week, every email you send, you've got to have at least one spelling mistake in it, and you have to wear odd socks every day. Ridiculous, right? But she made the biggest move forward in that week, just tolerating that email. From that moment onward, she never said to herself, it's got to be perfect, I've got to check it, because she's learned to cope.
Yeah.
So building coping skills around social anxiety or social confidence is a really, really good thing for emetophobes to do. What can I do to build that? You can join a band, you can learn to sing, you can challenge authority in some way, shape or form. You know, it's wrong really, and I shouldn't say it, but we've said to people before, why don't you park in the no parking zone for 5 minutes and wait till the traffic warden comes and tells you off, okay?
Yeah.
And just tolerate that. Say, look, I'm really, really sorry, officer, I didn't see the sign, or I was only here for a minute. My bad, I'm really sorry, I'm gone. And just tolerate that feeling.
Yeah.
A really good one in most cities now around the world, there's like a group like Toastmaster, where you learn to do public speaking and you get critiqued on it. I know a lot
Big
of the
fan of
Thrive
Toastmasters.
coaches do that. So think about all these situations. How can I improve my coping skills in that area? So you can do things like water, and you can do things like running or exercise. You could do things like spiders. What other situations in my life, if I look back, have I either avoided or wouldn't want to go there? Oh, I wouldn't want to do something. I wouldn't want. It's not really. People generalize. They say, "Oh, it's not really me." I don't know why. I've just never really liked dogs. All right, that
Yes.
basically
Yep.
means
Yep.
you've always avoided them. Okay,
Yep. Yep.
you've never been in that situation long enough to learn to cope. So get out there, find a friend who's got a dog, and start going dog sitting, and learn to cope. And you'll
Yep.
get over your dislike, anxiety, stress about dogs, but also you're doing something major. You're learning in yet another area how to manage, control, calm down your emotions. And the knock-on effect of that is massive. You had a client,
Yeah.
didn't
Yeah.
you?
Yeah, no, I do want to touch on that because I spoke about it at the end of the last podcast, but just another good example, and it's one that I've been practicing myself, being a Thrive coach, always in the pursuit of trying to build up my thriving skills, is I've always been a bit of a scaredy cat when it comes to watching horror films.
Okay,
And
perfect
as you say,
example.
it's something that I've gone out of my way to
Perfect.
to avoid watching them. Oh, they're not me. I don't like them, and it's been a bit of a challenge. But I'm really glad that I'm doing it. Is genuinely going out of my way to start watching a load of these horror films that I would never normally push myself to watch. Right, tolerating the discomfort, knowing that I can get through it, and thinking about it all really internally. And if I catch myself wondering if the demon is standing in the corner of the room whilst I'm brushing my teeth, it's another fantastic opportunity to start to gain a much more internal, realistic appraisal of the situation.
Yes.
So there's another one for you. If you don't like horror films, but you believe you can just about cope with watching one, go and do it.
That's
And process it really helpfully as well.
that's probably, Joe, the best one yet. And I hadn't even thought about that. The best one yet.
Thank you. Thank
Really,
you. Yeah, you're
really, really
welcome.
good.
Right.
You can set yourself a 10 horror film challenge, couldn't you?
Yeah.
The worst
Yeah.
rank,
Yeah.
the scariest 10 horror films ever, and you got to watch each one and keep your eyes open and keep yourself calm. What are you going to do? What am I going to learn to do? What am I going to do when I'm watching this horror film? I'm just going to tell myself, I can cope with this. This is all right. It's not real. I can calm myself down. I can do this.
Yeah.
You're basically giving yourself a really helpful inner voice, a really helpful narrative, rather than just saying, get out, I can't do this. And the more situations you can expose yourself in like that, the better. Whether it's a fear of needles, whether, if you've got a fear of needles, go and get go and buy a needle from Boots and practice on your own hand.
Yep.
Yeah, expose yourself to it. Instead of going, oh my God, I can't go to the doctor and have that jab. I'm so surprised the government didn't do this with a number of people that said they're not going to have a COVID jab. I know there were lots of good reasons for some of them, right? But some just said that they're frightened of needles. Why don't they send a pack out in the post? A get over your needle phobia pack. Well, before you come to us, here's one of the needles we're going to use. Practice at home a few times, get used to it so it's not so scary. Learn to cope, tell yourself it'll be all right. Then when you come in, it's going to be much easier. That might have even saved lives.
Yep. Yeah, quite possibly. So just sort of on the subject of coping skills, and I did mention this, I do want to bring it up, is in relation to agoraphobia, right? And the reason why I want to talk about it is the last podcast we just filmed was around how for some it can be a little bit more challenging when it comes to moving past their phobia. Don't take it the wrong way, Rob, but I imagine that it's going to be a little bit more challenging for you to run a marathon than it would be for me, right? You're on your couch 5K, you're getting there.
What are you saying?
It's going to be a little bit more challenging.
Okay.
Yeah.
More work to do.
And more work to do. A little bit more work, right? Still very doable, but a little bit more work. And
Sorry, Joe.
the same goes
Joe?
for... Yep.
Sorry. On that note, that's really important. Thank you for making that clear, right? On that note, it's not more challenging, okay? You've already done more of the work, right? You've already been putting more effort in to being fit and exercising than I have, right? So it's not actually more of a challenge for me. I'm just starting back 20 yards from you. That's all. Yeah, I've got
Yes.
more
Yeah.
work to do. It's not a harder process than it was for you. It's the same process, right?
Yeah. You
But
haven't got to do anything differently.
I'm starting from a lower fitness level than you, so I've just got more work to do. But when I catch up with where you are now,
Yes.
we've got the same work to do. So it's not harder.
Yep.
It's not that
Yep.
I'm more complex. It's not that I'm difficult, although I am all of those things as well, right? I've just got more work to do. Sorry, mate, carry on.
Yes. Yeah. 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 So you haven't got to do anything differently. You've just got to do the same process just for that little
More.
bit longer. And the same goes for a client of mine that I'm going through with at the moment. Is they have what's called agoraphobia. So for anyone that is unfamiliar with agoraphobia, it's a phobia of being in crowded spaces, leaving home, not to be confused with claustrophobia and tight spaces, although the two can sort of be a bit related. So in relation to emotional coping skills, there are, or this client has very much given up a lot of their sense of power when it comes to their ability to cope, right? So they are starting, as you say, it's not that they're any more complex or it's going to be more of a challenge. They've just got to work a little bit harder for a little bit longer, right?
Yes. Yeah. You had to.
Okay.
You've got to lose half a stone and get your fitness up by 50% to run a marathon. I've got to lose 2.5 stone and increase my fitness by 70%. It's the same process. We've got to do
Yeah.
the same things. I just got to do more of it because I'm behind you a little bit. I'm behind the curve a little bit. So if you've got someone then that's
Yeah.
got agoraphobia as well, clearly their desire for control has increased significantly enough and their coping skills have decreased significantly enough that this person's got to the point where they're saying, right, I'm not even going to leave the house if I have to. The only place I feel safe now is in my own home. Okay? So like me and you, that person has got to do the same program that everyone else has done, but they are starting a little bit further back because they've got to build up some quite basic coping skills first of all. They've got to do some basic challenging to realise actually they can go out and it's quite safe to go out and it's quite safe to do these things. So they're going to have to do tippy toes. Yeah? Go back to the metaphor of cold water swimming. Instead of walking straight in, going up to your knees, they got to dip their big toe in and get used to that first.
Yep.
And then half of their foot.
Yep.
And then the whole of their foot. And then up to their ankle.
Yep.
Because there's never any purpose in challenging yourself so far that it's just frightening and you create even more anxiety. That's the trick.
Yeah.
You push
Okay.
yourself far enough to move forward, but not so far that it's so stressful that you make yourself worse. That's why
Yeah.
if you've got a phobia of spiders, you don't go straight into the cupboard and pick up a spider because you might create so much stress and anxiety that you're never ever going to do it ever again. You do a little step, baby steps, little steps that you can cope with. You process it well, and then the next time you go a little bit further. So this person has got to dip her toe in, or his toe in, a little bit more. They're starting a little bit further back. They've got to get their head round what sense of power and control is, and then they've got to start building some real basic coping skills, getting back up to. Like I've got to get up to your level before I can then compete with you. They've got to get up to your average emetophobes level that are already doing those things. They're already getting on with their lives and working and going out and seeing friends and this kind of stuff. So they're just same process, but they just got to do a little bit more to move forward. There'd be no point with that person, as you already know, jumping straight into the challenging their thoughts about emetophobia, because that's a few weeks down the line, right? They got to do basic stuff now, real basic, building up self-efficacy, building up self-esteem, building up their social confidence, building up their general coping skills, start to feel a bit fitter, a bit more in control, a bit happier, managing their thinking. So basic thrive stuff. You're going to end up focusing more on the main thriving stuff for the first 4 or 5 weeks you're training them. Before you even mention emetophobia, You've got to train them up to this level before they can carry on then.
Yep. Yeah,
But
exactly.
that's
It would
all.
be, it'd be counterproductive for you to go straight into doing a 10K run, right? You might be able to physically just about manage it, but it probably wouldn't be good for you. It'd be far more beneficial for you to get out there and do the 2K and then build from there. You know,
Yeah.
you
And
haven't
what
got
would be the
to
point
do
anyway?
anything differently.
What would be the point
Yeah,
anyway?
yeah.
Because I'd want the confidence. If I'm doing those people that did the marathon the other week, if I'm going to do a marathon, I want to be standing at that start gate with
Knowing
the
you can do it.
memory
Yeah.
of all the training I've done and the memory of 2 weeks
Yes.
ago doing the half marathon and then the 10 miler before that. Because that's what, when I'm standing there ready to go, that's what's giving me the confidence to think, I can do this. I know I can do this. So I'm calm. I'm relaxed. I'm looking forward to it. If all I've ever done is a couch to 5K and now I'm on a marathon, I'm not standing at that start gate full of confidence.
Yep.
And you don't want that.
Yeah. Well, and you're gonna just build up a barrier to how powerful you feel about getting it done anyway. Because if you spend an hour running a 10K and having the worst possible time because you're just not ready to do it, then it's going to be even more challenging.
Yeah.
Or you're going to have to start even lower down
Yeah,
to
but
build stuff up.
perfectionist emetophobes might actually do that. They might be saying, look, I can go straight there. I don't need to mess around doing a 5K. I'm going to go straight in. And of course, they're
Oh,
going to
yeah,
set
they
themselves
will.
back
Yeah.
by doing it because they're putting themselves under so
Yes.
much
Yep.
pressure. Just one tiny thing.
Yep.
The thing about exposing ourselves and building coping skills, the one thing that allows you to do that is the realization that you can cope with a little bit. You know, when you get to the point where you've created a phobia and there's lots of black and white thinking, it's no, not going there at all. Could not go in that cupboard. Not getting in that cupboard at all. I know there's a spider in it. I can't do it. Okay? You have to say, well, hang on, just calm down a minute. Calm down. I'm not asking you. Yes, I accept that picking up that live spider right now would create lots of anxiety. But we're not saying that. All we're saying is open the cupboard door a little bit. Stand in the doorway, nowhere near a spider. Stand in the doorway. And you are allowed, you can allow yourself to feel stress and anxiety and tolerate it. You don't have to run away when it's only a 1 or 2 out of 10. But of course, that's what they're used to. I'm going to run away, I'm going to avoid, I'm going to hide, even if it's a 1 or 2 out of 10. They would tell you that it's never a 1 or 2. If you asked your clients, Joe, they would say, oh, it's never a 1 or 2, Joe. It's always a 10. That's not true. That's not true. It never goes straight to 10. It might feel like it does, but it doesn't. It's their reaction to the 1 or 2 that takes it to 10. Yeah, I couldn't possibly watch a video of someone being sick. Do you know what? Yes, you actually could. You actually could. You think you can't because you're saying to yourself, I don't want to do anything to do with that. And you've got to get over that thinking first of all, because actually you could dip your toe. Anyone could dip their toe in cold water and tolerate it. You're absolutely right. Anyone could do that.
Yes.
Many would think they couldn't. But that's part of the problem, isn't it? Getting over that intellectual hurdle of actually, I could do that. And it wouldn't be that bad. I could see myself standing in the doorway of that cupboard where I know there's a spider and calming myself down enough to tolerate it. And if someone then says to you, oh, I couldn't do that. I couldn't even do that, Joe. Okay, well, open the door and stand out of the cupboard then. I couldn't do that, Joe. Well, open the door and stand 20 feet away. You can't tell me you couldn't do that. And sooner or later, they'll accept I could do that. I actually could do that. Well, that's your start point then.
Do you think that that could also be partially down to the perfectionist way in which they're viewing that, of their version of doing it, right? Someone that's going through the program's version of overcoming emetophobia could initially be learning to love being sick, or if they're wanting to go out for dinner with friends, they want to be able to go out and eat all 3 courses and drink half a bottle of wine and do the whole thing anxiety free. So the idea of going along and just having the starter and not drinking any alcohol isn't worth doing it at all, because that's their version of not coping.
Perfect example. Absolutely. And they would think they're failing if they couldn't do that. Well, it's a process, right? It's a process. Okay, these things gradually get better if you do them and you process it well. and you've got the memory of it. If I can remember doing my 10K last week, and the fact that I survived and I wasn't that shattered afterwards, that is the biggest contributor to my confidence in my ability to do the 20K. Yeah?
Yep.
The fact that I've stood in the doorway where the cupboard is, where there's spiders, and I managed to cope, that is the most amazing thing for me, because up until I did that, I didn't believe I could. Now I'm thinking, well, maybe what's the next step? If I cope with that all right, and I didn't die of a heart attack, maybe I can actually go in the cupboard this time and cope.
Yep. Yep.
And that's how you start to change that and build coping mechanisms.
Yeah, fantastic. I think this has been, at least from my perspective, one of the most valuable podcasts we've done, because I think for a lot of emetophobia sufferers, they take the stance that they just can't do any of it, rather than thinking, well, there's actually a lot of things that I could do that don't relate to being sick whatsoever. And then that's going to help me to start to build up my emotional coping skills. And then that's starting to open the door a little bit more to the fact that they can get there without having to challenge their perceived 10 out of 10 safety-seeking behavior.
Yes. And of course, and they want it done in one go, and they want it done in one go without having to face any of their anxiety, because it's like this, I don't want to go there. It's the same way that sometimes people can't cope or find it very difficult to cope with death. You know, and you quite often, when I was a therapist, you quite often saw people who'd lost a loved one 20 years before, and they haven't looked at it yet. It's still there. It's waiting to be processed. It's in a little box that's locked up in the background because they think it's so big I couldn't cope. I'm not going to open that box. I couldn't cope. So you've got to get your head round. You've got to understand why you would cope before they'll open the box. You can't just make them open the box. There's no point in saying to someone who's massively phobic of spiders, just go in the cupboard and do this, because they won't do it. They've got to understand why breaking it down into those small, manageable steps makes it doable. So again, the intellectual part of it, the understanding of it, is massively important, not just doing it.
Yep.
Good one. Great one today. Thank you for that.
Yeah. No, brilliant. Okay, thank you, everyone. I hope you enjoyed listening. Cheers, Rob.
See you later, mate. Bye-bye.